My little presentation is how I kind of came to these ideas and why I joined Veterans for Peace, and then Phil will talk about more global matters. Here's my story. I'm minding my own business as a college student, and Lyndon Johnson is raising the ante in Vietnam. And so it was pretty clear that that's where I was going to go, or was headed. I had three choices. I think told myself I had three choices, or go to jail. I mean, those were my choices. And I was really conflicted. I didn't know what this war was about, and I was told that we were supposed to be fighting communism, and I'm against communism. Anyway, I just allowed myself to get into the military, and I ended up in the Navy, and I ended up as a line officer on a destroyer. And much of my deployment or my time was in Vietnam. And in fact, we were in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive. And those of you, you're all old enough to remember that or have heard of it. It was kind of the height of the war, and we didn't know that at the time, but it was. And so mostly we were up and down the coastline of Vietnam. I mean, that's what our operations were, including north of the 17th parallel, into North Vietnamese waters. And by the way, Lyndon Johnson was telling the American public that we would never pursue the war north of the 17th parallel. This was to defend the South, but there we were. And we actually exchanged fire with the North Vietnamese, and they hit us in the north. But mostly what we did was supporting the troops on the ground. And well, one of the things that we did when we didn't have anything else to do, and this was so-called H&I operations. H&I means harassment and interdiction. And so our job, under the direction of somebody higher than us, was to go up and down a certain part of the coastline, and every minute fire around into the jungle, just at random. And you do that 8-12 hours running, and that just sort of keep the enemy on their toes. This was day and night. And sometimes we would be involved in specific military operations where there was some kind of objective involved in an actual engagement, and we were a part of that and receiving our orders from somebody on the ground, usually a colonel in the Army or the Marines. And but mostly what I could determine from just off the coast and during all of this is that we were destroying a lot of people's homes, a lot of people's livelihoods, just in destroying their lives, really, as civilians. And sometimes we'd go into these engagements, which didn't last more than 10 or 15 minutes, or maybe longer, but not too long. And we'd always, after the battle was over, we'd always get a report from the colonel on the ground. And he'd always radio back to us, good job, tell us how great a job we were doing. And then he would give us the body count. Now, who were these people we killed? We never were told. Were these military people? Were these women, children, old men? I mean, I don't know. To this day, I don't know. But that was our success indicator. How many people we killed. As all this is unfolding, this didn't make any sense to me, nor, I might add, did it make a lot of sense to many of the people I served with, particularly the junior officers, let alone the enlisted people. So the whole experience to me, and I'm not joking when I say this, but it was a lot like, that's why I like the program so much, that MASH program. Remember, that was a situation comedy on TV? It was like MASH in the sense that it was a bunch of young officers in a world gone mad and trying to make some sense out of it. And the only difference between me and Alan Alda was that he had better writers. I really mean that. I mean, because we would sometimes play absurd practical jokes on one another. That was to ease the tension, but it was an ugly time. And after it was over, we all got medals. I got 4 medals. Pretty impressive, huh? What was I gotten medals for? And I come home and I've got my fancy uniform on, and my mother is thrilled, and she's parading me around like this big hero, and that made me feel even more uncomfortable. I got medals for doing inhuman acts, as far as I was concerned, and the ship even got a medal because we were in a hostile fire. That all seemed kind of silly too. I think I got more medals than my son did in the Cub Scouts. You know, I mean, it was just, we're decorating one another for our moral fortitude. So it all seemed so wrong to me. And that was about the time, I don't remember the sequence, but remember Muhammad Ali said he wouldn't go to Vietnam. He said, what did those Vietnamese people ever do to me? Why should I go and kill them? And he was, as far as I was concerned, he was right. And that's the way a lot of us felt. And so I think what I was suffering, I never had a name for this, or what I was feeling anyway. I wouldn't say suffering, but I was feeling moral injury. And I never had a name for this until last year. That's about a year ago, right? We bought that film, Phil and I, we will meet in a minute. Phil and I brought a film to the Twin Ports. We showed it once at Scholastic and once at UND. I guess we showed it twice. We met a lot of veterans. It's a really powerful movie. I don't know if any of you saw it, but it deals with interviews with combat veterans from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and how they felt about it. And moral injury is not the same as you know, shell shock or PTSD or anything like that. It's a different thing, although even to this day, but especially after those wars, I was never comfortable with the 4th of July or with fireworks going on or anything like that. And so maybe that's a little very slight case of PTSD, but it's not that serious. But to this day, and from that point, I'm very uncomfortable with Veterans Day. I don't like that holiday, and if some of you recall, I had a piece in the Duluth News Tribune about that about a year ago, about why I don't like Veterans Day. And one of the worst things about it, and I won't go on about that because that's not what we're here to talk about, but the line that I really cringed by, and I still hear it, heard it fairly recently, "Thank you for your service." And my response is, who exactly was I serving when I was destroying those villages and driving those people out of their homes? So the kids in the street were right and Lyndon Johnson was wrong. I mean, that's to put it in a nutshell. After I got home and we got settled, and Julie and I ended up in Duluth after several years. We started, and by that time, by the time we were settled in Duluth, the war had pretty much ended. And then we were getting this wave of refugees, remember that? From Vietnam. And we hosted several couple unaccompanied minors, kids in our home, foster kids, and one of them is still very much in our life. In fact, I'm going bike riding with him this Saturday. And we also hold, and Julie was the initiative for this, but I think we had a very strong, I know, we had a very strong effort to adopt a Hmong family here in Duluth and looked after them and got them settled. And that was with Donna Carlson. Some of you may remember her. She was also active in that. That's some way of paying back, I guess. This Hmong family, by the way, now lives in St. Paul. They're doing very well, and the youngest child is on the St. Paul City Council. So she's been very successful. So that's a little of my background and kind of how I felt that, we're on the wrong track here. Is kind of cognitive dissonance. Some years later, Brooks Anderson and I and Donna Carlson and Arno Khan, we went to Iraq as a kind of peacemaking mission and part of the initiative to establish another sister city in Iraq. That was kind of pioneering, I think, and we went to this city in northern Iraq, this Kurdish city, and Rania, and we were welcomed there, more than welcome. They were delighted to see us, and it was a wonderful time in Rania. And one of the people that I kind of got close to, I got close to him because he was a high school teacher of English, so he had some English. And uh, he welcomed us and said it was great. And he said, you're the first Americans we've ever seen who weren't wearing a military uniform. Wow. What kind of image are we presenting to the world? So after that, in that trip that Brooks and I and Arnold Kahn and Donna took to Iraq, I was writing a series of articles, and they were all published in the Duluth News Tribune about the trip and everything. And as a result of that, I kind of got on Brooks too. We kind of got on the lecture series about the trip to Iraq, and I went to a group sort of like this at another church, bigger than this, but of course there was no Zoom, so look at I've got these people here. But and I came there to talk about the trip to Iraq. And the first thing to introduce that, I just said one of the reasons I wanted to go there, and this was after, that invasion that we did in Iraq, and after that, a few years after the war, but there was still trouble brewing there. And so I just said, well, I'm a veteran of the war in Vietnam. That was a mistake. I want to see what's going on in Iraq. After I said that, I got the words out, I'm a veteran of the war in Vietnam. Applause, which kind of shocked me. Because I didn't come, and I said, what's that applause for? I didn't come to talk about Vietnam, I came to talk about Iraq. And this guy in the front row said, thank you for defending our freedom. Now, these were solid Duluth citizens, from a mainstream church here in Duluth. And they're all drinking the Kool-Aid. I mean, in what way was I defending America's freedom by blowing up these people's houses and driving them out of their homes? It doesn't make any sense. We have a problem as a nation, I think, and that's what Phil's going to talk about in a minute. Thank you for defending our freedom. Some years ago, Julie and I and one of our Vietnamese sons went back to Vietnam. And with his son, so there were four of us, our grandson. And that was a wonderful trip at all kinds of levels. And one of the reasons it was wonderful, and we went to some of the places that I was bombing, and I found that, that was kind of moving. And we went to a little village north of Saigon, who at the home of the uncle of our Vietnamese son, welcomed, very, I felt very comfortable in their home and all that stuff. And I noticed, we had this big dinner, and I noticed on the wall in his house, it looked like a military citation. I couldn't read it, of course, because it's in Vietnamese. And, I asked him about that, and yes, it was. It was a military citation for 13 years of service. 13 years, holy cow. I served 1 year, and that had a huge impact. Imagine serving 13 years. And so then I kept asking more questions. What army was he in? Who was he serving? What do you think? Anyone want to take a guess? He was Viet Cong. He was Viet Cong. They were the Southern, because we were in South Vietnam, that was the Southern militia trying to defend their country against the Americans. So, I made some bad jokes and good thing we're both bad shots and all that stuff. And then he got serious and he said, I just want you to know that it wasn't anything personal. Wasn't anything personal. He was trying to kill me, but it wasn't anything personal. We just wanted you to leave. That's what he said. And he wasn't political. He was a farmer. He wasn't full of political ideology. He joined the Viet Cong because they were the group that was trying to get the Americans out. There's a wonderful museum in Saigon that tells the whole story of liberation of Vietnam from the foreign invader, beginning with the Japanese and the Chinese and the Dutch and the French and the Americans. We're just part of the long story as far as they're concerned. So a couple more anecdotes and then I'll turn it over to Phil. A few years later, this is not too many years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, I think. As many of you know, I used to go to Russia a lot, and I'm sitting around chatting about politics with a pretty close Russian friend. I've known him for 35 years, so in fact, we had his daughter in our house a couple of weeks ago as a guest. And we're just talking about world events. We're not arguing, we're just chatting about it. And he had some point to make, and I can't remember what his point was, but the preface to his point really stuck with me. He said, well, the Americans, as a very warlike people, and he was making, warlike people? He's talking about me. That's his impression. He wasn't being accusatory. That was a kind of fact. And you're going to hear some of those facts, I think, from Phil to make that point. But that got my attention. That got my attention, that we're seen by this fellow who really likes us or likes me, and I like him, that we're a warlike people. So the bottom line is, it seems to me we have a kind of addiction to war, finding military solutions to every problem that we turn to. And we have a problem as a nation, it seems to me. One of the things maybe is we lack imagination, how to solve problems. I'll finish with this. I had a cousin, believe it or not, who was in the FBI for many years. Before that was so problematic as it is now. But he mostly went after bank robbers and kidnappers and so forth. But he said his training, and he was really interested in guns, and he was a crack shot, and he got medals and everything. But his training as an FBI agent was to solve the problem non-violently, if you can. The last thing you want to do is draw your gun. And he told me that, and we were talking about this. In 25 years in the FBI, he said he drew his gun twice and pointed at somebody. So good for him. That's the way to solve problems, if you can. So that's my story, and that's what kind of led me to want to join. I never was interested in joining the traditional veterans groups. That never appealed to me, but somewhere along the line, I heard about Veterans for Peace, and so a few years ago, I joined, and Phil was already there. So I'll turn the microphone over to him and let him talk about global issues.
Well, I want to thank you also for allowing us to come and talk to you today about what I think is a very important issue, because it's at the root of much of the problems that we create around the world. Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, and we're on Zoom here too, so yeah. So if we did not have the militaristic thinking that Tom mentioned, if we did not have a history of this, perhaps we would be able to find better ways of dealing with our neighbors around the world. And that's really what I want to talk to you about. And Tom's been very personal. I'm going to be very wonky. So my background, just real quickly, is I joined the military in 1975, the Army, because I needed a job. I joined the Army National Guard in 1986 because I had a job I was getting laid off from a lot and I needed the money. So I've been an economic draftee twice in my life. It wasn't because I had any particular patriotic zeal or anything like that. Most of the people I've worked with over the next 20 years in the military did not have anything significant in terms of that nature. They were just poor-dumb slobs like me that needed the money. I am retired from the Naval Reserve, which is a long story I won't go into, receiving benefits. I have health care. I have a retirement check, 100% coming directly out of your tax dollars. So I'm a hypocrite, basically. But I use a lot of that money to advocate for peace and for advocating for changing the way we think about our militarism in this country. So I'm going to have to start by asking a few questions and then give you a definition of what we're talking about. Some of this stuff I'm going to read so that I get it right and don't mess up what I want to say. Why is it that our country is constantly fighting wars or killing people on the other side of the world? Why? Why are we frequently supporting other nations and arming them and supplying them with the money and the ammunition, as in Gaza today, to do the same? And yet we can't afford, or say we can't afford, to have the things that other nations around the world supply for their citizens. National health care, child care, affordable education, in some cases free education, housing, environmental protection. Well, we never have any shortage of money for war, do we? No one ever asks, how much is it going to cost when we go into one of these boondoggles? So we at Veterans for Peace believe we have a problem with addiction to war. Militarism dominates our national thinking, our foreign policy, our domestic policing, which we're seeing today with the Trump administration, and our national spending priorities. And I'll get into that in a minute. This thinking continues to get us into problems, into no-win wars that do nothing but kill and maim people all over the world. Millions of people we've killed all over the world. Does nothing except kill people, waste resources, and cause increasing national debt. So I'm going to read for you a definition of militarism, which is in some of our documents that we have back here. Help yourself to all of that. We have 3 of them there on the topic we're talking about today, including some pretty good quotes from other people of various kinds. And you notice on our poster here and over there as well, quotes from military officers on this subject that agree with us. Obviously, you cherry pick who agrees with you. So anyway, militarism is a set of beliefs and practices that regards war and the preparation for war as normal and desirable social activity. Militarism is the belief that war is justified in protecting national interests, especially economic and foreign trade interests. These beliefs result in an excessive emphasis on the military and in national affairs. Militarism is characterized by excessive spending on military preparedness, aggressive foreign relations with other nations involving threats of military action, a propensity for using military action to resolve international conflicts, the glorification of war and military service, and the subordination of other societal needs to those of the military. Militarism exalts military service as the highest expression of patriotism and service to your country. Do we ever talk about or thank the peace activists for serving their country, or the labor activists, or the civil rights activists for serving their country? No, we do not. It's only veterans. And I can tell you in 20 years of my service that I consider it to have been a huge waste of money and time, waste of my time, waste of the nation's money, and we could have been doing many other things that would have been much more profitable for our country. I came out of college with a degree in education, secondary education. Never had a job as a teacher directly, but have instructed and taught in many different situations in my employment life. The government would not hire me to do something good with that training. It would hire me to go to Fort McCoy and dig holes in the sand and fill it back in again. And I came home from many. A guard weekend, reserve weekend, feeling like I had wasted that time and effort. And I have a chest full of medals. Not just 4. I mean, I look like the PX hero if I were to put on all my medals. Some of them perhaps justified, most of them were camping merit badges, basically. So just like in Boy Scouts. We have the most powerful military, best equipped, most technologically advanced, and the most expensive in the world. We spend more on defense than the next 10 military powers in the world combined. Over half our national disposable income, which we call the discretionary budget, gets argued about in Congress every year and usually doesn't get passed in a timely manner. Half of it goes to the Department of Defense. And that's not all the spending on militarism. When you add in all the other things going on in other departments, and I won't go into the details on that, but it comes to in excess of $1 trillion a year. Diplomacy receives a meager 3% of that discretionary budget. We have over 800 military bases across the world in 140 countries. The State Department has 168 embassies and 83 consulates across the world. 72% of all federal employees, which our current administration is busy bad-mouthing and cutting and firing illegally and doing all kinds of nasty things to, 72% of these federal employees are defense related. That's the civilians in the Department of Defense, the active duty military in the Department of Defense, and in the Veterans Administration. 72%. The State Department has 1% of federal employees. This stark disparity between funding and support for war versus diplomacy is clear evidence that we value military action over cooperation, negotiation, and peaceful conflict resolution. You could not find a stronger piece of evidence to our militaristic thinking than our budget priorities. Americans in our political leadership do not understand that national defense is much more than weapons and troops. It's learning to get along and using the institutions that are out there to live cooperatively with our neighbors around the world. We would be much more safe in our national security if we did that rather than the militarism that we practice. What are the alternatives? Well, there are many alternatives, obviously, as Tom referred to. I'm going to just mention two. One is a quote from Andrew Bozovich, retired Army colonel, a professor of history, an author of many books on the subjects that we're talking about today, and on foreign policy, and on what would be a better foreign policy. And he says regarding our militarism, and again, I'll read it to make sure I get it all right. There is an alternative approach far more likely to yield positive results. That alternative approach posits a reformation of American exceptionalism based not on muscle flexing in faraway places, but on modeling liberty, democracy, and humane values here at home. And the other one I'll mention is an organization called World Beyond War. And there's a sign-up sheet back here if you would like to be on their email list, and they're asking you to sign a declaration of peace by signing that. I have that there, and also some information about their plan for world peace. And there's a copy of this here, which I will leave with you. And I hope you will pass it around to everybody and read it. It's fairly easy to browse. And there's also a little book put out by Veterans for Peace called Addiction to War. It's a graphic cartoon description of some of the history that we didn't have time enough to go into today. But World Beyond War has this comprehensive plan, very, in my view, very good plan, very well thought out, to create a safer, more peaceful world based on cooperation rather than militarism. And it's called the Global Security System and an Alternative to War. And if you don't want to wade through the whole book, if you go to their website, they have a free summarized PDF that you can download that gives you the basic parts of that book. But the current world system based on military security is a failure. It doesn't work. And it doesn't work for one very simple reason. And that is that whenever you have peace through strength, meaning military strength, that's the only strength we ever try to promote with our country. We don't think about peace through strength of the morality of our position or the justice of our position. We only think of it in terms of militarism. But the peace through military strength is actually insecurity for everybody else in the world. If we have the most powerful military, they are being threatened by our military. If they have a powerful military, as in the Chinese or the Russians, we feel threatened. And so this, back and forth results in arms races, and everybody is less secure, is basically their point. And so they advocate for what they call common security, and you build that by demilitarizing national security, managing conflicts through peaceful conflict resolution rather than violence, and creating a culture of peace. We definitely have a culture of violence in this country. You look at it everywhere, from the Monday Night Football to the video games to the way we raise male children in this country. to, I mean, anything you want to look at. We have a culture of violence, and it's getting worse. It's been getting worse for several decades now, but especially under recent times, and I won't go into that. So that's the story. The alternatives are, we have many institutions and pathways to a more peaceful world, but our government refuses to be involved with them or to seriously use those pathways. They use the United Nations occasionally when they need some fig leaf to cover whatever action we want to take. But we've never really seriously have empowered the United Nations to do the things that would make a more peaceful world. Peace is the only real national security. And so with that, you know, our primary purpose here today, I don't know where we're at time-wise, but our primary purpose was to try to have discussion with all of you and to get your reactions and your thoughts and everything else.
Doesn't see the words. I think, yeah, sure, thank you. Yeah. And if you could repeat the question afterwards for the online people, Bill.
Yeah, actually, this is addressed to maybe Tom Morgan. He and I played tennis, and midway through the tennis matches, we solved world problems.
Yeah.
The question, we have a war going on now with Russia invading Ukraine. The question is, what is U.S. participation in this war and the Allies' influence in getting Russia to actually invade Ukraine? You want to tell the story about that, Tom?
Yeah.
How guilty we are. For
Yeah.
launching
Well,
a
thank you for asking that question. That was a good serve.
I just love one.
This is something I feel very strongly. I mean, look, I don't want to get into a lot of, we don't have time to get into a lot of detail about Russian-American relations and the war in Ukraine, but here's the short version of that. Putin invaded Ukraine. There's no getting away from that. And it's a brutal, ugly war. But why did he do that? That's the big question. And I'm trying to not use a lot of words. Basically, we just lost the load. Oh no. Basically, we kept moving after the collapse of the Soviet Union, or well, even before then, after the Berlin Wall fell and Germany united. And the question was, what do you do? You know, Western Germany was in NATO, Eastern Germany was not in NATO. Gorbachev, who was head of the Soviet Union at that time, was in a difficult position because his country was falling around him and people were leaving, you know, abandoning communism. But you still had the Warsaw Pact, you still had this huge military arrangement in Europe. Well, anyway, the deal, Baker sent the message that if you allow United Germany to join NATO, which was a threat to Russia, not one further inch east we will go. And we'll allow Russia and the United States to make Central and Eastern Europe a kind of no man's land, a kind of neutral area. And we didn't do it. You know the history. Beginning in 1999, one European country after another joins NATO, and NATO gets closer and closer and closer to Russia, and including the Baltic republics. Barack Obama, of all people, goes to Estonia, and I can't remember precisely what year this was, but after Estonia joined NATO, congratulating them and saying, we've got your back, and called Russia a second-rate power, right on their border. And Putin repeatedly asked us not to do this. His most famous remarks were in Munich in, I think, 2007, if I'm not mistaken, where he said, don't do this, it's threatening. Imagine if we had Russian troops on the Canadian border and the Mexican border with missiles pointing right at Washington, how would you feel? That's what Putin said, and we ignored him. We kept moving, and then there was a meeting, I guess maybe I'm talking too long, George W. Bush proposed Ukraine and Georgia go into NATO, and that was a bridge too far. Russia felt humiliated, Putin felt humiliated, and we're going to draw the line. Ukraine will stay within the Russian orbit, and that's what led to the invasion, in my opinion. And this, I think, supports what Phil said. We used military approach to dealing with Russia instead of listening to what the Russians wanted. Remember the Partnership for Peace? That was under Clinton. That's before all this NATO stuff happened. Russia was actually part of the Western Alliance, and there were Russian troops and American troops working side by side as peacekeepers in Bosnia in the early 1990s. So what happened? Phil Anderson had the answers. Sorry if I talked too long. Go ahead.
I think I got this working again at the same time. So these are great questions. We have time for at least 3 or 4 other ones.
This is a sort of a psychological question. When I was in medical school in the 60s, I did this experiment where you were behind like a wall, and if you built a hospital on your side and the other person built a hospital, you got $1 or $5, whatever it was. If you built a missile facility and the other person built a hospital, you got $5. So the first couple rounds, we were both building hospitals. And then the fellow across the wall, or whoever it was across the wall, started building missile units. And so I played the game a few more times, and then I decided, well, hell, I'm going to build missile units also. And so what does that say about our psychological defense to war, to aggression, to what's going on between countries?
Want to take that? Or? I don't want to dominate here.
Well, yes, you're absolutely right that this is an intellectual, a mental, an emotional kind of problem. It's in our psyche. My wife tells me all the time that I'm, beating my head against the wall because humans are a killer rate. We've been that way for tens of thousands of years, and we're going to continue to be that way. I don't quite agree with that, but yes, this is the problem. It's in our heads. It's not, this is why we need citizens to take action to change the way we think about the world.
Can I add to that, if I may?
Yes.
I was just inspired. There was a piece by David Brooks just a couple of days ago in the New York Times, because we're all talking about democracy and the rule of law and everything in this country. And he was basically saying what Phil was saying, yeah, there's darkness in the hearts of all of us. We're capable of doing awful things. And our founding fathers recognized that. And that's why they had the checks and balances, to prevent any one organization or one person from going in the wrong direction. What we need, and that's what this organization, the World Beyond War, is about, is having global checks and balances to prevent that.
Here, please.
And I just add real quickly that we have these things already. We have, in fact, since way back in the late 1800s, been building the institutions, the treaties, the World Court, the UN, the League of Nations, et cetera, that are the rule of law type of actions that would allow us to be more peaceful and to deal with conflicts in other ways.
Are there Veterans for Peace organizations in other countries? And if so, do you get together? Like, for instance, would there be Veterans for Peace in Russia? And could you all get together, go to the UN and, yeah, teach?
There are not any in Russia. We have sister cities in Russia, which is a very good organization. But we do have a few international chapters. My understanding is there's one in Okinawa, there's one in Ireland, there's one in Britain, there's one in Vietnam. And there's one just across the US-Mexican border, I believe in Juarez, that works specifically on dealing with US military veterans, many of whom are combat veterans who have been deported for various reasons. Yeah, how's that for thanking the troops?
Great questions. Can we go now? In addition to the two things that Tom mentioned about Russia making a rapprochement in terms of the border between Russia and Europe, there was another one that came first from Stalin, and we just spat in his face, and we did that each time. And this goes back to the national security documents 67 or 68. And there were two different approaches to dealing with Russia, and one that was militaristic, one out. And it created a fear factor, or is based on this fear factor. We got to be afraid of the communists because even though Russia was down on its knees and couldn't even get up, we still developed this fear factor. Where does this fear that is within us come from? It's not just fear of the Russians, it's fear of each other to many extent. I mean, I've taught in inner city ghettos in Chicago, both West Side and South Side, and the fear factor is tremendous. Where does this fear come from? This is what's behind it all.
She wants to answer the question. They go for it.
In my mind, fear comes from ignorance. And if we strive to know each other more, the fear will go down. And one thing you said, you know, how we raise our males in this society. Well, I really respectfully ask that you say how we raise our males and females. Because females do also raise males, and
Right.
how the mother is affects how the male is. So anyway, that's just me respectfully saying that.
I stand corrected. My point was that most of aggressive, violent action of any kind going on in our country usually comes from males. You know, and it's pretty statistically stark in that area. And we have all kinds of images of manhood that require you to be tough and strong, and sometimes females preach that too, but anyway.